Film Trace. This is a podcast where we trace the life of a film from conception to production, all the way to release and reception. We always focus on a new film, either on streaming or a brand new film in general. I guess the box office is open now. They opened this week. So there are new movies. There's that new Russell Crowe movie that's actually playing at AMC theaters right now. So maybe we'll have to do one of those. Maybe we'll gear up in our PPE and go to a movie and see something new.
But for now, I'm a public school teacher, so I don't get any PPE.
Oh, you don't get like a mask or anything?
I get one cloth mask.
That is so brutal. We've been focusing mostly on streaming films. We usually do a brand new movie to streaming one week, and then we do an older one that's sort of premiering on a streaming network like Netflix or Hulu. What do we have this week?
We were kind of trying to blame each other for choosing this one. It's the new David Ayer film, The Tax Collector, starring Bobby Soto and Shia LaBeouf, along with some other interesting choices for supporting roles. It had a simultaneous theatrical and VOD release earlier this month at August 7th. What the heck is this movie about? I see that in our notes document, I had a pretty brief description of the plot, and you decided to expand it.
I just copied what was in Rotten Tomatoes. I just felt like, try to remember what your brief synopsis was. What was it?
To quote unquote tax collectors collect money for a gang leader, and then there's a rival gang leader at the end.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty good. I think this one, it talks about, I like this last sentence, or Wizards is like, he's the crime boss. I'm going to read the whole thing. A crime thriller set in the streets of Los Angeles. Family man David, Bobby Soto, and his longtime partner, Creeper, Shia LaBeouf, are tax collectors for the crime lord Wizard, meaning they collect his cut from the profits of local gangs' illicit dealings. But when Wizard's old rivals returns to Los Angeles from Mexico, the business is upended, and David finds himself desperate to protect what matters most to him, more than anything else, his family. So a little bit more, it's a little bit like, but like when you see this thing, you could literally just say it's a gang movie about people killing each other.
Yep.
I don't think there's really. The family part of it, as we get into it, will come up a little bit more, but it's definitely...
That was in the thesis statement. There's a graphic that is the thesis statement for the film in sepia tone before we see any live action shots, right? Where it says...
And it looks like it's like CGI from 1995.
Yeah.
Like it's really bad. Like that's the first thing I saw on Twitter about this movie was someone like, this is actually in the movie. I think you posted it. I don't even know who posted it.
Yeah. I forget who it was. But it's I was going to say it's a trip, but it's really not. I think my Letterboxd review was, I'm going to have boring nightmares tonight. Maybe let's do our thing. Let's trace this. Where the hell did David Ayer, who's probably best known nowadays for bringing Suicide Squad to the screen, but probably cut his teeth with co-writing the original Fast and Furious, as well as the Oscar-winning Training Day. The script is not Oscar-winning. That was Denzel, right?
Yeah.
That was the only Oscar
I think just Denzel. Yeah.
But yeah, so what the heck? I mean, he also made he's made a lot of crime LA movies, right?
He's obsessed.
He grew up Southside LA, correct?
Yeah. So he he had this like heyday, like in the early 2000s with Training Day, Fast and the Furious, Dark Blue. Which did you see? Did you force yourself to watch it? Please watch that movie. I've
already purchased one David Ayer film. I'll probably see Bright.
It's worth seeing. Oh, Bright is nearly
still
unwatchable.
Haven't seen that.
He had his heyday back then, and like he's continued. And this is going to be, I think, a reoccurring discussion on this podcast: is how does this guy keep on getting solid work?
Right.
It's not just one-offs. Like this is a little bit more. This movie cost $30 million to make. Like this is not an indie film, right? Like in any traditional sense. He's obsessed with Los Angeles. He's obsessed with South Central. I think, as a kid, he was a troubled kid on the East Coast, got kicked out of his house. moved into with his cousin. This is like the early 80s in South Central Los Angeles. And he constantly brings it up in interviews. I think because he feels like there's definitely, I think now a lot more criticism of like the stuff that he covers. It's not only the fact that he focuses mostly on South Central Los Angeles and a lot of gang culture related to that area, but also the police. Right. He did End of Watch, obviously Training Day, SWAT. Street Kings, is that a cop movie? It's gotta be, right?
Based on a James Ellroy novel, but it's Keanu, so it's very strange. But so I guess The Harsh Times was probably the 2005 Christian Bale movie, the one that's most similar to what he's doing with Tax Collector.
Yeah, I would say so. Although I've only seen the poster to that, I can tell from the poster that it looks very similar to this.
I mean, it looks trashy, right? Like that's my big question that I think we should kind of put out there, because I would like it answered before we end around minute 35 or whatever. Is there a sense of self-awareness of the, kind of Z-grade straight to DVD mid-90s vibe that is happening in this movie?
Oh, no. Not at all. I would say absolutely not.
Right,
like, there's no...
I didn't know it was that easy.
There's no showgirls irony here. Like, this is... I think this is just... Yeah, I think he's just a dude. I think he's just a guy who lives in Los Angeles and, like, hangs out at martial arts gyms. That's where he met Bobby Soto for this movie.
At a dojo.
At a dojo. I think he's just... And maybe because I'm not super bro-y, but I know that dudes just are out there who are like this. They lift a lot of weights, and I see him at the gym all the time, or he used to. And like, they just have like a very sort of, you think for someone who is a pretty good writer, right? Like, he wrote some pretty good movies. I would say like the script to Training Day is pretty good. Fast and the Furious. I mean, I'll say this. Dark Blue is not a good script.
He writes,
I don't know what I'm saying.
Scripts.
Yeah, successful.
I keep coming back to Training Day because I was so, like, even as like a high schooler when that movie came out, I was still like very confused why it landed Denzel an Oscar nomination.
It's not very good. I don't think it's a good movie at all.
It's pretty bad, but like Denzel elevates it. So it's just very confusing. And I didn't see End of Watch. I confused it with the James Gray movie We Own the Night. But I mean, I know there's a lot of defenders.
That's a great movie.
That is a great movie. That's why I thought End of Watch was good. But I've heard people actually say that's kind of on another level from his other movies.
I kind of like End of Watch.
Okay.
I think it's an okay movie. I thought it was definitely very different than the other stuff that he's done. But yeah, I think he's just a guy who loves to think about, I guess, the time that he was growing up in this area. I don't think he lives there now, does he? He must live in like Malibu or something.
Right.
He lives in like not Culver City, like, I don't know, Palisades, like a really nice area.
The weirdest thing though is that, like, I mean, he bounced around from Illinois to Minnesota to Maryland in his early years, and then after South Central, he joined the United States Navy. So it's like, I feel like it's a very, like, I know that, like, when you come of age, like, wherever you are, that kind of sticks with you and stays with you to some degree. But it kind of feels at this point like he doesn't want to let go, or that, like, I don't know. This is a whole question that maybe this is a better kind of opening question before we get into more of the details of the conception and production is, like, is he coming back to this place, this setting, meaningfully? Or is he kind of exploiting, because there's a lot of talk about, before Shia LaBeouf's character was really known about, it really seemed like he was doing brownface. David Ayer is white himself, and he wrote and directed. Yeah, he's giving a lot of parts to Latina actors. But he's only representing them as, like, horrible criminals.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, okay, so it goes back to the sort of aesthetic that he has. Like, I don't think there's any irony to his aesthetic. And I kind of think that he is going back to this world, I want to say kind of out of respect. And I don't really see it necessarily. There's some exploitation going on, of course. Like, he's a white man making this movie in an industry that like props up people like him and lets him fail repeatedly. I mean, he's the perfect example of it, right?
Yeah.
Him and Brett Ratner. You know, like, so there's that part of it, but I think in the actual storytelling, I don't see a lot. I think he does respect at least the world that he knew growing up there. I don't think he has any connection to it much now. But I don't see it as sort of super exploitative, like, oh, I'm going to go into this, you know, underprivileged area and sort of tell their story for them. It doesn't really have that vibe to it, to me at least.
I mean, supposedly Soto and him, and Soto is Latino, built this story together, these characters. Is that right? Even though David Ayer's the only writing credit?
Yeah, you would think that Soto would get a writing credit if that was true.
Right. Or a story credit. I don't know.
We built the story together. We worked together. We collaborated. That's what Soto said. I mean, I don't know. Like, he also, I think I would say this about Ayer, that like he's the type of guy who would take credit no matter what. You know what I mean? Like he just has this sort of vibe to him. You know, he reminds me of a lot, and this might be super insulting to this guy, but whatever. Peter Berg.
Ooh.
He reminds me a lot of Peter Berg,
a guy I once respected.
I never respected him ever, because I had this like gut feeling that he just, I don't know. There's a similar, like, maybe it's like, because I don't understand men like this.
Right.
He's just like super bro-y, and like makes these like not good movies that are pretty popular. And like, there's, I don't know, there's like this thick layer of broness going on an existential level.
Yeah. It's like toxic
get.
Masculinity personified.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you would call it toxic masculinity. There's something about it, just like, it's uneasy to me. You know, what this thing is all about, and like, you know, looking at like the conception of this, you know, there wasn't a lot of detail. Nope. One thing I also noticed too, he did not do interviews for this movie. So the interview people were Soto. LaBeouf didn't do interviews. It was like people on the cast outside those two did, you know, talk about this film, but he didn't talk about it.
Right.
Which I thought was strange, because it's almost like, did he know that this was getting dumped on some level? Did he think that like this wasn't going to get like a full release because of the pandemic and he wasn't super into it? Or was he avoiding the brown face controversy? Right. And didn't want to get involved.
Right. And because also LaBeouf didn't really have a lot of press for this. It was mostly Soto, and I, you know, found interviews with some of the Chicano rappers that had parts in it, including the lead villain, the big bad, Conejo, who said a number of things, where like, and also like a very small bit part. There was a Hollywood Reporter interview with the guy who plays Danny, who I think has 2 lines in the movie. It's just like, it's like really, really scraping. I also saw in a review that was probably one of the most incendiary negative reviews. I know we're jumping around here, but Brian Tallarico, I think, made a good point on RogerEbert.com that perhaps this movie wasn't actually finished before the pandemic happened. And
oh, wow, I didn't even think about that.
And that perhaps
that's an interesting point.
They cobbled it together in the editing room because they knew they didn't want to like go back to try to finish it, because who knows when the pandemic would be over.
Oh, wow, that's an interesting thought.
But
yeah, that's entirely possible. It kind of has that little bit of that sort of puzzle piece together sort of feel to it,
right?
Or cobbled together, I should say.
Yeah.
It does not feel coherent.
No.
Like, yeah, the story's all over the place. Like, it's a pretty messy thing. I mean, I think one thing too that I picked out sort of, and looking at like how this thing was actually made, the financing deal doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah,
we should
explain this to me.
We should have like Hendrix on here, one of our friends who kind of does like movie financing and budgeting and stuff, to explain this to us. But like, so like, Ayer and Chris Long are part of Cedar Park, which is like a production company. They co-produced it with Cross Creek. Cross Creek is financing the film with senior financing coming from Atwater Capital, also Eyewood Studios, who I've never heard of before. CAA, which is the sort of agency for creatives. I'm assuming that Ayer is represented by CAA. Media Finance packaged the film and arranged the financing and will broker the domestic distribution rights deal. That's a word soup, right?
Yeah.
Like there's like 6 different production companies. the key component here is the agency that represents Ayer. Like that, there's something really odd about this whole thing. And how did you get $30 million? What my gut says about all this is that David Ayer is not a great creative. He's a great business person. And like, he understands how to convince people with money to give him money to make the things that he wants to make. And I think that might be what he's like the best at, because to get $30 million to make a movie like this is mind blowing to me without a major distribution deal already set up,
right, with
a Universal or a Sony or whoever. Like, that's how you're going to recoup your cost, or even like a Blumhouse, right? Like something like that. None of that was here. This is almost like it was kind of independently produced, but by rich guys, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can't remember any other time I've seen a business with the word capital in it in the opening credits to a movie. Like, that straight up sounds like something out of The Big Short, where it's just like dumb broy guys that, you know, are doing business deals. And they're like, oh yeah, fuck yeah, let's throw $10 million at this movie about Los Angeles street gangs, just like for no reason.
I can see this pitch meeting. Yeah. Like, it's at like Nobo in like, you know, Hollywood or where the hell it is, Sunset Boulevard, and they're drinking like really nice cocktails, and one guy just came off of work. He's an Atwater Capital. He's like a gray suit. He's like a younger dude, but he's got lots of money. And David's there like at the bar, and just like, he just wheels and deals, man. He wheels and deals in that world and gets 30 million.
Exactly.
It's almost like Atwater Capital sounds like something that would start it's almost like VC funding, like you'd start a startup company.
Exactly. But like, they had to have known they were just like throwing their money away just because they want to.
Oh, I don't think so. No? I think the people that put the money behind this, I think they were sold a line of goods by Ayer, and I think that like that's his specialty.
Right.
He can convince you that he has the magic when he so clearly does not.
I mean, you painted a nice picture for this pitch meeting, and now imagine if Ayer also gets to say, and get this, Shia's going to get a real tattoo for the movie. It's like,
or it could have been like the $30 million because he got Shia.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean? Like I got him in. He wants to do this.
Right.
But I mean, like, okay, so we're being pretty negative. I don't want to be too negative about it. Let's talk about the positives.
We're
of this
researchers,
production.
not critics. No.
Yeah, we gotta stand. We gotta be objective here.
Let's talk about this production process a bit more before we get into the release and reception. One other thing I wanted to mention, that interview. It was Variety, not Hollywood Reporter, that interviewed the Chicano rapper Mr. Criminal. He actually, and this kind of goes with what you were saying about like Ayer being a wheeling and dealing businessman more than a creative type. He originally had no contact with Ayer. He was actually given a small role also in 2017's Bright. And basically Ayer was just like a huge fan of this guy's music and just kept calling him and Mr. Criminal says in an interview, like, I just kept getting notes saying, Will Smith director wants to talk to you. And he's like, fine, eventually I guess I will. And then and so then he ends up like getting a role at Bright and then on Tax Collector. And then he has this funny little anecdote about when he meets Shia, and he says that he's starting to freestyle with him, and he says, we started freestyling, David Ayer's recording, I always tell him to send me that footage, but he never did. He didn't want to send it to me because I ate Shia's ass up. He's cool, but he's not fucking with Criminal. It's just, and this adds into the whole vibe of the set, is that it seems like all these actors that are out here doing this press, and you know, maybe it's just for press, but I don't doubt it. I bet it seems like they were just like, I guess they're having fun, even though I don't know how you have fun in this movie because there's so much like horrific violence.
Oh, I get the feeling that everybody really enjoyed making this movie.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like,
because I didn't enjoy watching.
It has, well, yeah, I mean, I didn't either. It's pretty universally, it's awful. I mean, it's one of the worst movies I've ever seen. But it's like, you know, Cynthia Carmona talks about like how in Shia goes all in. And like they rehearsed this film for 2.5 months before shooting. So like, what? That makes no sense to me. But like at the other hand, but then it makes perfect sense because that's what Peter Berg would do.
Really?
And like he also puts, okay, so David, he puts everybody through boot camp. Everybody has to go through it. I read this in another article. I forgot to put it in here. But if you are in a movie with David Ayer, he puts you through a martial arts boot camp, no matter what your character is. I'm not joking. This is real. And so, and then Cynthia says, we rehearsed this film for 2.5 months before we started shooting. That included 5 hours a day, 5 days a week, and 2.5 hours each day was martial arts training. That's for everybody. So it's like there's this professionalism, there's this obsession that he has about doing things well and doing things right. It's just like he's missing the creative spark that makes it interesting, that makes it have emotional depth, because none of that's here.
No.
But all the work is here. And I think he sounds like he's pretty good with actors and getting them to sort of. I didn't find the acting to be that bad.
Oh, it's atrocious. It's sometimes hard to tell when it's the script versus the acting, of course. But
Soto's not good. I think we can.
I know
he's not good. He's not good.
I
thought some of the other actors were pretty good though.
I think Carmona has something there. I think that she was probably the only. But then that's a whole other part. Is like the female roles versus the male roles is just insane. But I don't know. It's just I feel like there's like such a seriousness to it, right? Like there's maybe two
totally.
jokes in the whole movie, and they're not good jokes. But then like it just makes me feel like that. I don't know who enjoys making this kind of stuff. Where is the joy?
Some people like the movie. I mean, let's talk about the reception here.
Let's get into it.
And so, the arty farty people like us with our liberal arts degrees, who become film critics, we hate this film. Yeah. We absolutely hate it. It's like our poison. 18% all critics on Rotten Tomatoes, 36 out of 100. That's one of the lowest scores I've ever seen. Top critics, 0% on Rotten Tomatoes. Can't go lower than that, folks. 33 out of 100. Metacritic, I don't think I've seen something this low in a long time. 22%. That's out of 100.
That's worse than last week's Remember Me from 2010.
I mean, these are extremely bad reviews from film critics. But there's a weird silver lining here, I think, for the movie. The Rotten Tomato audience score is at a 64%. At least it was when I checked it last, which is not that bad. But then you get back to the sort of arty people, Letterboxd, 38 out of 100. Which is really bad. 1.9 out of 5 stars if you go by their ratings, and that's very, very rare. You're going to get below a 2 for anything. Right. IMDb's at 47 out of 100, which I thought would be more correspond to Rotten Tomatoes a little bit. Obviously, no cinema score because there's not enough theaters, and I think they stopped doing surveys in general. So, critics absolutely abhor this film, and I think people who are into film in general don't like it. But I think maybe some of the middle of the road audiences, and I read through the audience reviews on Rotten Tomatoes. It's pretty fascinating. I mean, it's one of those things where, our perspective is obviously a very specific, but it doesn't overlap with a lot of other people's perspectives. I think, our viewpoint of this film and what we're talking about is definitely not what somebody who just watches movies for fun, is not super into Kubrick or like Wes Anderson, and they see this and they're sort of like, oh yeah. And you can see that in the VOD numbers, right? This thing is successful for the release that it's having. How is it done on a VOD and stuff like that? I mean, it's not doing poorly, right?
No, it's not. It was number 1 on iTunes. It also cleared supposedly $1 million just off of VOD. I haven't
updated that. It's actually $5 million.
Oh now. My gosh! From Fandango, Amazon, Google Play. It's nuts. And they're doing the drive-in thing as well, and that's another thing that like the movie gives me that vibe, right? Like that B movie 70s or that Z grade straight to DVD 90s vibe. And so I get it. It would probably. I guess if you like this type of thing, you would probably have fun with your friends at the drive-in, even though I feel gross inside every 10 minutes during the movie. Here's the thing is like at the end of the day, I think the one thing to consider is not just like the demeanor of the person going to see this, but like I teach a good number of Latina students, and I'm curious. I'll ask them. I'll
100%
film studies this semester. I'll be curious to see if they caught this, because like straight up, like they're not getting represented in Hollywood, and even in movies about like drug cartels and gangland and all that stuff. Like they're still it's still from the perspective of the white cop almost always, like Sicario and like Narcos is one of the only other like places, like especially after the first couple seasons when Boyd Holbrook's character leaves. Spoiler alert if you're behind on that. But you've got comedian George Lewis, you've got the Chicano rappers Mr. Criminal and Caneo, and you've got Jimmy Smits. I mean, I'm sorry, spoiler alert, because I guess that was supposed to be a surprise that it's Jimmy Smits as Wizard, the lead.
Is that who it was? I couldn't even pick out who it was.
I know it and that supposedly that was like supposed to be that, and that's also supposed to be like a big reveal at the end that he's his dad. But that's another thing. Like, but
that's their characters. How is that? I mean, that's why it doesn't make any sense.
No.
Like any of that shit.
Right. So it's but I don't know.
So let's dive into some of these reviews to kind of give some context of what people were saying. Let's start out with a positive one. The tax collector presents some intriguing setups in the well-paced early going. Comedian George Lopez turns in a strikingly good dramatic performance as David's uncle Louis, Richard Roper from Chicago Sun-Times.
Of course, it's Richard.
I don't even know how I feel about that. Did you think like George Lopez did pretty well?
I mean,
I thought he was kind of poor, actually.
In comparison to what he has to, I don't know. I mean, it was a very small role. Like he had like 4 scenes, maybe. I don't know. I think that's still novel to some people when they see a comedian that can, remember lines and act them seriously.
Zach, did you pick this Roger Ebert one? I think you did.
Yes, it's oh my gosh. This is Brian Tallarico again, the one that posited that perhaps this was cobbled together in the editing room because they couldn't do a lot of through lines. Probably the biggest through line that baffled me is basically the second act turn when the rival gang just randomly shows up immediately after Bobby Soto's gang has their initial meeting saying, hey, there's rivals in town. And it's just like out of nowhere that they just found their, auto mechanic hideout and they start having this shootout. It's insane. Brian Tallarico says, once you get past the horrifically casual racist stereotypes, non-existent character death, incoherent plotting, cliche dialogue, and baffling editing, what's perhaps most insulting is how numbingly boring the whole affair ended up. And I got to agree. I mean, this is our penultimate episode, our 9th one. I was probably more bored by this movie than any other one that we've watched so far,
including The Darkness. This is more boring than The Darkness.
Yeah,
which I could barely get through.
Yeah,
it wasn't as painful as the last 20 minutes of this. Is just brutal.
I know.
And LA Times kind of sort of agrees with that statement. One of the most atrocious viewing experiences of the year. The tax collector relies on a trite visual language built on obvious flashbacks and bland imagery that match the unimaginatively dreadful writing where every Latino in sight is a gangster. Carlos Aguilar, LA Times. I like that one just because it felt like it's the LA Times. They're obviously going to have a very specific viewpoint of this film because he claims that city and he claims that he's representing that city in this film. And yeah, I mean, that's the one thing too. It's like, are people being too critical of the stereotyping and the cliches and the gangland culture that's in here? Is that something where if it was a different group of people in a different place, would the sort of criticism be that thick? Or do you just feel like that's, it's a very clear thing to criticize on a movie like this?
Like who do you think? Like if it was who instead of the Chicano gangs?
Say like a Boston Irish gang. Like think of like The Town.
I mean that's a fair point. I mean, what was that or what was that movie about the guy from Sons of Anarchy?
Or like say
the football
Boys in the Hood. Boys in the Hood.
So that's an interesting parallel because I mean, not only do you have to consider the fact that that's a movie featuring a black cast by a black writer director, and there's like tons of social commentary threaded throughout, right?
Yeah.
And like there's even like a very self-aware scene with Lawrence Fishburne as I forget which character's father, but talking about, you know, gentrification and how that has become like a root societal cause of gang activity. And then there's none of that here, right? So
Yeah.
even if there was, like, I get it, you want to make a movie about gangland culture, sure, but make some kind of point to it, right? Have some kind of depth to it. But I think that's the key thing here is like that opening title card thesis statement, whatever you want to call it, at the beginning, it says, what does it say? Like love, honor, loyalty, family. And it's just like it's like a ninth grader's reading of The Godfather, right? Like identify the key themes.
I think Ayer believes that his focus on the family is doing the Latino culture in Los Angeles. Like he's being honest. He's being authentic because of the family aspect of this film. And I didn't really feel like that makes any sense. Does that? I don't think that really counts as sort of diving into a culture.
No.
And trying to understand it more. It seemed very, like you said, it's very shallow.
Yes.
He's skimming along the surface. And at the end of the day, you know, I feel like if he didn't write this movie would be way better.
Yeah.
I just don't think he's a good writer.
Right.
As a director and a visual, even with actors, I think he seems like he's decent, like workmanlike almost. But, you know, the core of this film is incredibly trite, like the LA Times said. There's nothing going on here that has any emotional insight or depth, I mean, whatsoever.
Yeah.
It's completely void of that. And that's not always the end of the world with a movie, because you can make a movie, you know, using cliches and stuff like that and have it be okay. But here it's just, there's nothing beyond sort of Shia LaBeouf's crazy sort of character. That, like, what'd you think of Creeper? I mean, 'cause that's the thing. I keep reading these reviews from people, and like they all call it Creeper. Shia LaBeouf's character is like a, you know, kind of the hitman part of the tax collector group, as being a shining point of this film, or a shining beacon in a pretty dark film. What do you think about that?
I mean, I have to admit that, like, I was probably most interested when Shia was on the screen, but it was marginal at best because there's such a thinness to the character. It's literally just a guy that really wants to kill people, and
there's nothing else there,
right? Like the guy does his best to try to like go under the surface with that. I mean, he has a very good, like, menacing commitment to the role, but other than that, it's just like bleh. I mean, it is a supporting role.
Yeah.
And if you're not going to get depth with the protagonist, you're not going to get depth with the side characters. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's
no 100%.
And here's
what interests. Oh, go ahead.
I was just saying, like, and I think one of the things that, like, we keep coming back to here, and I think that's where perhaps, like, the dialogue about Shia's character, you know, when the trailer came out, people thought he was doing brownface, and David Ayer took to Twitter to clarify, like, no, he's a white guy. There's always that white guy, and it's almost as if, like, David Ayer was kind of projecting, right? Like, here, like, this was my role. Like, I was the guy that was,
of course, 100%.
that was appropriating the culture and was embraced for whatever reason. And I mean, it's an interesting question, and it's a question that I think is becoming a lot more open, out in the open today, with a lot more blunt conversations about race and about appropriation, that I think Ayer is kind of just, it's going over his head. And so he's not really realizing that it still is problematic, even if technically, no, he's not playing a Latino character. It still rubs some people justifiably the wrong way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. He's not the type of guy that reads culture critical theory. Like, he's just not the guy.
Yeah.
And what's crazy about all this stuff is like how did this thing get made? $30 million. It clearly was never a good movie. So anybody invested in this was probably not very smart. But he is going to continue to be successful in this industry. And I think that's the part of this where I watched this movie. One of the reasons I wanted to watch it and leave this sort of movie is that it doesn't matter how good or bad his movies are. Like, if you look at his track record as the director, you look at Suicide Squad, which is a horrendous film. on any level that you view it. It's not good. And I'm not just sort of knocking it because it's a comic book movie. There's a lot wrong with that film. Birds of Prey, pretty good, actually. Not that bad. He executive produced that. But then you look at Bright, also terrible film.
Yeah.
And now he's got Bright 2 coming out. He's going to be filming that.
He's doing a remake of The Dirty Dozen.
Dirty Dozen. And so like this is, and that's why I bring up Peter Berg. Peter Berg never stops working. He could make like 6, he had like Deepwater Horizon. That was terrible. Patriots Day, also kind of like why. And he does that sort of stuff, but he's never not going to have opportunity. So like one of the things that like you think about representation and power and race in the movie theater industry, and Ayer is a perfect example of failing upwards and never having to be accountable for the actual quality of his work.
Yeah. And he's missing the point. I mean, there was an article in Variety about Latinx representation in Hollywood, and he's quoted as saying, "I always grew up around Chicanos. Where's the effing Hollywood Chicano superstar?" And he's like not understanding that it's not just like in front of the camera that's important, it's also behind. And it just, I mean, if you think about it, like this has been a huge conversation in recent years, because you've got Alejandro Iñárritu and Alfonso Cuarón and Guillermo del Toro, and like the thing that we're forgetting is that like these are like legit Latino people, Hispanic people that did not grow up in America, and so there's an element of like they are still like educated and very well read, and so like we're missing that whole culture that is America's behind the times on, and Hollywood's even more behind the times are on. And I just hope that we would see that, because I would love to see a genuinely good, deep meditation on these kinds of characters from somebody that actually knew how to write a story. Yeah, and unfortunately we did not get that with the tax collector. So I'm happy to put this one behind us. What are we doing next week as our season finale, season 1? Yes, we're going to take a break after next week's final episode for, I don't know, a couple weeks maybe, and debrief and kind of get out there and try to get people to hear the previous episodes. Definitely check them all out, but we are going to end on a high note. It's been a little while since we've done a good movie. We are going to look at 2014's thriller, I guess it is. Nightcrawler. I guess you would call it a thriller. Yeah, it's a thriller. Yeah. It's a classic. So if you haven't seen Nightcrawler, it's on Netflix. And then we're going to do the show next week. I'm really excited about it. Me too. I think it's a fantastic movie, and I really want to dive in to how that thing was made. In any event, thanks for listening, folks. This has been the Film Trace podcast.